Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. I know everybody's extremely busy. So today we're going to go through Cisco Secure Endpoint Orbital, the next generation endpoint protection utilizing Cisco Orbital. I also have representative from Cisco as subject matter expert, Brian McMahon, on the phone with us also. He's going to be taking over some of the presentations. At any time, if you have any questions, if you'd like us to stop, please feel free to use the chat window in the WebEx. That's usually the easiest, and people will be able to interject with myself and Brian and let us know the questions as they come in. We're also going to give some time at the end for Q&A to discuss any questions or potential confusions you may have about Cisco Orbital. So a little bit before we get started about Aspire Technology Partners. So Aspire is a professional technology solutions. We're based out of Eatontown, New Jersey. We have offices in New York, and I sit out of my Mount Laurel office, New Jersey, on a daily basis. It's closer to my home. We are a 4-time master Cisco Gold partner. We specialize in multiple areas: enterprise networking, collaboration, security, which is what we're discussing today, data center and cloud, mobility, and IoT. We have a variety of solution architects and service delivery engineers, multiple CCIEs. We have over 2 decades for our outcome-driven approach to provide guidance, and we really place a high value on our high-touch, hand-to-hand personal interactions with each of our clients. So each deployment, each technology deployed in your organization, we place a high value on personal interactions. We actually have a full customer success team designed specifically around that to make sure that we're delivering the best possible solution to your organization that is needed. So today, guys, we're going to go through some agendas here. We'll start with the endpoint security and context. Then we'll go through what the differences between EPP and EDR is as part of the XDR Cisco security solution platform is. Go a little bit through prevent, detections, and response. Give you kind of a high-level overview of what is Cisco Secure Endpoint Orbital is. Do you have it in your current organization? What do you gain with it if you have Secure Endpoint? Or if you're looking at Secure Endpoint, what are some of the new features that Cisco Secure Endpoint Orbital gives you? We'll go through some Talos backend threat intelligence that's integrated into Cisco Secure Endpoint, specifically around Orbital too in this PowerPoint presentation. But then finally, we're going to do an Orbital deep dive. Show you a real live world production incident, right? So there's been a lot of malicious outbreaks recently. Orbital is going to give you a back-end integration utility to be able to deep dive and scan your endpoints without interacting with the user's interface, so they won't see the actual, do deep dive analysis. So we'll start with the endpoint security and context. So where are we at with Cisco Secure Endpoint? Well, right now, it's redefining the endpoint security platform. So with Cisco Secure Endpoint, it came from legacy, what was known as Cisco AMP, Advanced Malware Protection, right? So now it's called Cisco Secure Endpoint. With the current state of Secure Endpoint and Orbital as an advantage here, you get a full XDR platform, a endpoint protection, and endpoint detection response platform. So we're not just doing the legacy, non-dynamic and static antivirus programs and protocols. You're getting a dynamic update. Your endpoints are protected 24/7, 365. As soon as if there's a malware outbreak or if Talos has an outbreak overseas, for example, you're going to get pushed updates dynamically. So the power of this is really the dynamic continuity where your users have no interactions. They're not having to push an update. As an IT architect or engineer, you're not having to manually push updates anymore. It's dynamically updating to all of your security systems. So a little bit about the endpoints, right? You're the last line of defense in a secure hierarchy. The endpoints is really the last line of defense. They're one of the most common targets, as you know. I'm sure if you come from a legacy antivirus program or if you've been around the IT industry for a long period of time, you'll know that these are the most common targets, right? You see it all over the news. Any kind of cybersecurity news nowadays is how there's a ransomware attack and all of the encrypted laptops are actually completely hosed. There's no one can work. Everything from a user perspective is completely shut down. So the endpoints are vital to any organization. But more importantly, you need to maintain the visibility into these from a single pane of glass. You never ever want to have something where you have multiple departments you can't get to, you can't see. And that's also important when you talk about a remote hybrid workspace solution. So if your office and your corporation's not doing a full back to the office, or if you have no plans to do that in the future, Cisco Secure Endpoints with Orbital is going to give you the operational deployment to be able to make sure that you protect your endpoints no matter where they are. You can do isolation for them remote. Someone's at home, Starbucks, traveling. It's going to give you the opportunity to deep dive into that endpoint and do analysis. So the whole purpose of the entire security and context here is to see it once and block it anywhere. So if you have other products in your organization, so maybe that's a firepower firewall, or if you have other like an MX for Meraki, or maybe you have Cisco Umbrella from a DNS layer. With the Threat Intelligence Cloud, the process of the tailless integration is to see it once, block it anywhere. So that the real power, as I keep saying, is the dynamic updates to all of the security platforms mentioned here. So Secure Endpoint, in this example, gets a dynamic update. So if Taylor sees an integration or an alert from a Umbrella instance out there in the public cloud, for example, or another provider overseas while I'm asleep in the middle of the night, my client, even though I'm not directly getting attacked yet from my company's organization, my secure endpoints are going to be dynamically updated. I'm not going to have to wake up in the middle of the night. I'm not going to get a phone call, and I'm not going to have to interact with that dashboard immediately. It's going to be done on the back end. So what is what's known as XDR? Well, it stands for Extended Detection and Response. Block everywhere, detect everywhere, respond everywhere. Specifically around how the workplace has changed. Hybrid, remote. Some people staying remote permanently. Maybe branch offices are lower in staff counts. We're going to be able to give you a XDR solution, a visibility no matter where that endpoint is. So you're not reliant back on the legacy endpoint or egress interface, outbound interface of just your headquarters location. So with the XDR, you're going to get the same visibility and control across all attack vectors to defend against today's dynamic threat, advanced threats. So whether that is email, firewalling, MX from a Meraki perspective, Secure Malware Analytics, StealthWatch Cloud, or Secure Endpoint, they're all dynamically updated. So that gives Cisco the advanced options and ability to go ahead and block the threats dynamically, all from a single pane of glass immediately. Cisco XDR also has a new feature. If you have Cisco Secure Endpoint and other third-party products, you get access to Cisco Secure X. With Secure X, there's also an advanced security for faster defense. You can take all of your products with API integrations and put it into a single sign-on pane of glass. Threat response is available for fast remediation and investigations directly from Secure X built-in XDR platform. Each dashboard is customizable. So maybe I have staff, for example, that is on the NOC or the help desk environment, and they're not really going to be doing remediations. I don't want them deep diving into malware analytics on a workstation. It's fully customizable in order to track details and, more importantly, give out permissions based. All of the new Cisco next generation security platforms have what's known on the bottom of the screen here. You can see where it says the word home is a ribbon feature, and that's going to allow the sharing of context between all of your teams and the work between all of the tools, whether that's Secure Endpoint, the Secure X dashboard, or any of your other security portfolio products will integrate directly into this single pane of glass. So with powerful XDR requires a strong endpoint protection and endpoint detection and response. With this, Cisco is preventing a malware attacks is ideal, but you can never ideally, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, you're going to prevent 100% of your malware attacks. So what is the analysis process of preventing malware attacks? Well, before it was the traditional point-in-time detection, right? So you had on-site, or for example, on an endpoint, you would have an antivirus agent. Maybe at a firewall perspective, you would have an IPS. Then you would make your initial inspection of that point in time detection. So I see an actual malicious event, I need to do an initial inspection. But the thing with the next steps and the next generation technology is the analysis here never stops. So with your secure endpoint with Orbital, you're going to be able to continue deep dive analysis, right? So you're not going to have any blind spots where I just have a single pane of glass, single point. All right, I checked it, it's clean, or it's not clean. If something was to get through that's marked clean, but then is marked malicious, when it gets to your endpoint, for example, it'll dynamically update to your secure firewall, to your email security system. And what that is just continuous analysis and retrospective security. So with Cisco Secure Endpoint, specifically around Orbital, if we do deep dives and we find a threat that has a point of origin, we'll be able to see what it's doing. What has it been talking to on your local workstation? For example, if I downloaded a file, I had a user that downloaded a malicious file, but then it utilizes explorer.exe, we're going to retrospectively go back and identify, surgically target where that has been talking to from a process level perspective and remediate it. We're also going to get a single pane of glass for the rate of its progression and how it's spread to stop future attacks. So from a secure endpoint, the EPP, the EDR, and the XDR, it's a lot of different acronyms, right? There's a three big prong approach here. It's protection and hardening, right? We use that with behavior analytics, machine learning, signature-based detections, attack surface reductions, integrations such as the other portfolios with Cisco, Duo for multi-factor authentication, application two-factor authentication. AnyConnect, Cisco Umbrella from a DNS or secure internet gateway level. That's going to do the protection. From a detection perspective, you're going to have continuous monitoring, advanced endpoint search, which we're going to get into here with Orbital, sandboxing capabilities, threat hunting, not only from a endpoint protection, but also with SecureX, and more importantly, unmanaged endpoint discoveries. I'll be able to dynamically scan things that maybe a user is not sitting on at the current moment. As long as I have internet access or when it comes back online, I'll be able to automatically schedule that scans. And then from a response, I can build out an organization inside Secure Endpoint with Orbital. We can build out the custom block and allow lists from a file level, network, application, and endpoint isolations. With Cisco Secure Endpoint and Cisco Secure Endpoint with Orbital, I can isolate an endpoint and say, at this point, it's remote, for example. Someone is not on site. They're not VPN'd into my organization. Well, how do I get to that infected endpoint? Well, with Cisco Secure Endpoint, I can isolate it to where it's only going to communicate to a specific list of resources, including the Secure Endpoint dashboard and SecureX, and allow me to remediate and deep dive and threat hunt on that box. So where do we enable? So Orbital is enabled, number one, at what's known as the Cisco Secure Endpoint Advantage licenses. So with the Advantage licenses, at this level of licensing, and if you have older licenses or if you're confused about what license you'd have, please let myself and marketing at aspiretransforms.com know. I'd be more than happy to look at it and discuss where you're at and how can we get you to the Orbital options. But with the Advantage license, you get two big capabilities. You get the Orbital Advanced Search console, and you get also access to Cisco Secure Malware Analytics. Used to be called Threat Grid. It's going to give you the availability to do sandboxing and deep dive malware analysis. With Orbital, you're going to get a wide range of attributes running in your system. So I'm going to be able to scan registry keys, running processes, the libraries that are installed locally on that. And that's not just applicable to Windows. We can also do Mac and Linux. A couple caveats for versions. I'll get to that here in a couple minutes. But with Orbital, you're getting an extensive category of pre-built queries mapped to multiple different layers of attacks. And you can import your own threat intelligence feeds into this process configurations and threat hunting also. You get proactive threat hunting and faster incident response with the actual combination of Secure Malware Analytics and Orbital. All right, so this is what a screenshot of Orbital looks like here. So Brian, do you want to maybe take control and then speak a little bit about it?
Absolutely, and I'll dive more into the nuts and bolts of this in a minute. Thank you, Mike, for that excellent sort of gallop through the world of endpoint protection. And, you know, I like to tell people that just about any security incident that's ever happened in cybersecurity has probably originated on an endpoint, it's targeted an endpoint, and it's maybe used others as a spring point. People hopping from one place to another inside an organization as they expand their footprint. So endpoint security truly is where the rubber meets the road, right? Like you said, it's your last chance, and seeing what's going on is therefore critical, which is what this is all about. I'll get into the details here in a bit, but what we're looking at is sort of a snapshot of the query catalog here, and then you sort of consider where does all this stuff come from, right? Because the queries are being generated, stuff's getting added to the catalog regularly, and let's see, there we go, it is advancing for me, hooray. And then it shows up in your endpoint console in various forms. What drives this? Well, what drives it is the largest and, in my humble opinion, best threat intelligence team out there. Certainly in the non-classified space, we have more people working on this with access to more and better data than anybody else in the business. And that is the team that, as Mike already mentioned, we call Talos. I think probably about 400 now, really smart, dedicated folks whose full-time job it is to ruin the bad guy's day with all kinds of telemetry sources, all kinds of analytics, industry relationships, and they are the heart and soul of the information that drives our security ecosystem here. And Orbital is a piece of that, as you will see in action. As well as the Secure Malware Analytics piece, the artist formerly known as ThreatGrid. Right? This is an incredible source of information for us and therefore for all of our customers, because anybody who submits something here, right? They see an unknown thing in their environment, they send it to Secure Malware Analytics as a sample to run in a controlled environment, see what it does. You know, if it does bad stuff, it's probably malware, so let's mark it as such. Which means that the threat that you blocked on your endpoint this morning might have actually been discovered by a Cisco email customer in Singapore last night. But because of this sort of integrated view that we get from Talos across multiple products, multiple architectures, multiple regions, it means that the sort of real-time threat intelligence that is flowing into all of your Cisco security products is unmatched. Now let's take a little bit of a dive into exactly how this works with this thing that we call Orbital Advanced Search. And it begins with, okay, how do I turn it on? You know, where's the on switch for this thing? So as Mike mentioned, this is enabled at the Advantage license tier in Cisco Secure Endpoint or higher. You know, most of the sort of core functionality is in what we call the Essentials license tier, and then Advantage builds on that. It gives you Orbital and Secure Malware Analytics, which my mouth keeps on wanting to pronounce as ThreatGrid because it's just been that way for so many years. And to turn it on in your Cisco Secure Endpoint console, you need a couple of things. It's cross-platform, right? We support it for Windows, Mac, and Linux. There are a couple of little sort of provisions here, which I've got on the slide here. I'm not going to drain it. All this is getting recorded. You can go ahead and read it yourself at your leisure. And then once I've got that deployed on the connectors, it's driven by policy in your endpoint console, how you manage it. You turn it on group by group, policy by policy. You enable it, and now you've got your two choices for how you want to manage it. Orbital actually runs under the hood as a separate little piece on the endpoint. And so you've got your choices. You can either have the updates always happen in lockstep. When you update your Secure Endpoint connector, that's when you update Orbital as well. But the Orbital release cadence is every couple of weeks they've got a slightly tweaked connector there. So if you want to be able to deploy that when it's available, you can switch to update schedule automatic, and that means that the main endpoint connector and the orbital piece can manage themselves independently. How you want to do that depends on your environment, your change control, your bandwidth, etc. Once you've got that in place, what does it get you? Well, Orbital is built on an open source technology called OS Query, which is this really cool thing that enables me to treat an endpoint as if it were a sort of SQL-style database. And all of the things in that endpoint can be accessed and referenced in a SQL-style query. So from the main dashboard, we've got the stuff across the top. We've got the queries, we've got a job scheduler, we can see the status of the endpoints, and then of course a lot of the meat is in that catalog of pre-built actions that we give you. Because you might be saying, well, you know, Brian, this sounds really powerful, but I'm not a Windows internals guru and I'm not a SQL wizard, right? Can I actually use this in my environment without having to spend a couple of months going to SAMS classes to learn how to figure it out? And the answer is absolutely yes. That's what the sort of pre-built stuff is there for. So here's what a query looks like. You can do this ad hoc, right? If you've got something that you know, or you grabbed it from someplace else, and we'll show you at the end of this a place where that might happen. But you can actually just bop over to query. You type in a selector up there for the endpoints. In this case, I just said all. I want to do this on everything in my environment, and you'll see why in just a second. And then I'm going to type in the custom SQL window. Okay, select star from programs for a publisher like Splat SolarWinds Splat. And you know, if you remember a little while ago, you know exactly why one might want to do such a query, right? There was a vulnerability, there was a supply chain attack, there was a CISA directive to everybody to go figure out where you might be vulnerable in your environment, and this is a quick way of doing that, right? This covers not just the expected installs, but also, you know, hey, you know, a year ago somebody installed this on a test system in the lab and then forgot all about it, but it's still running. But Orbital is going to find it. Right? Anything that has the orbital connector active is going to respond to this and say, yeah, you know, here's where it is. And then that tells me where I need to validate. Now, I'll also get like the version, so I'll know not only is it there, but also is it vulnerable. The jobs, when I schedule such a thing, even lets me take it one step further. Do you see that little thing there that says link query? This is an amazing feature that they just rolled out where I could take the results of one orbital query and then use it in the next one. So I could take something like that select star, you know, from programs with SolarWinds, and then I could have a linked query that then does something else on only the things that returned positive for running the software that I targeted. So you could have a more impactful, you know, returns a lot more data query restricted to only the dynamic subset of stuff that responded positively to the first query. So that has all kinds of potential for baselining, threat monitoring, incident response. And then the catalog here, right? I need to spend a few minutes on this. So we've got, you know, I think, I don't have the exact count. You see it's now 16 screens of stuff here. And again, it's cross-platform. It's also mapped to a couple of different things. So we take all the queries and we sort of categorize them. We also sort of sort them into the MITRE attack framework. So if I'm looking for something, if I know that there's a particular threat actor that I'm worried about, and I know that they use these particular tactics and techniques, then I can go and look and see what's in the catalog that I could use to either proactively get ahead of this, right, monitor for the kinds of vulnerabilities that are being exploited, or indeed even see if something like a backdoor or an indicator of some kind corresponding to this thing that I'm looking for exists in my environment right now. And it's a way of sort of drilling in on stuff. And of course, where does this stuff come from? Our Talos team, right? As they analyze stuff, produce blog entries, create detection mechanisms for things. They're also looking for things that they can map to orbital queries, create new ones on the fly, roll them out in the catalog, that sort of thing. So this sort of threat intelligence that you've got working for you here. And just sort of as an example, you know, maybe I want to drill in on, I know that there's a group that uses the NetSH helper, and that is a tactic in the MITRE framework. I select that. I see that there is, in fact, a responsive query here in the catalog. And then I click on that to take a closer look at it. And we get a sort of description of what this does. We get, in this case, a sort of notice that this can produce a lot of data if you're firing it at every endpoint in your environment. You get the exact SQL that the query is going to use. And oh, by the way, before I go on any further, let me just say a word about performance here. So people sometimes wonder, okay, yeah, full queries of my endpoints, that's great, but what impact does that have on the endpoints? Is that going to be like sort of massive cataloging process that's going to chew up all of the CPU on the user systems and things like that? Not at all. This is in our experience, a very lightweight sort of thing in the background. And let me just give you a concrete example. The last Cisco Live event that was actually in person was, I think, Barcelona 2 years ago. And as we've done a couple of times there, we run a capture the flag exercise at Cisco Live. And for the last couple of iterations of that, we've had Orbital built in as part of the exercise there. In that case, you had, you know, maybe a dozen at peak times or more workstations at that capture the flag area, going through these exercises, all hitting the same queries, and they were actually all targeting a single Windows VM. For the entire capture the flag exercise, there was one Windows VM servicing the whole thing. Everybody was hitting it with Orbital queries, and the queries were returning with basically no delay. And somebody actually got on and used that endpoint, the VM, during the exercise, and it was fine, right? So this is something that can take a licking and keep on ticking, as the old advertising slogan used to go. But it's been designed from the beginning with performance impact in mind, which is what these caveats here about excessive data are really more about the receiving end than about the individual endpoints. It's, you know, this is going to produce a lot of stuff. Are you sure you want to do that? Are you prepared to handle it? But then I sort of just click that little button that says, okay, add that to my query, and then here I go. I've got my query set up. It populated it with that the SQL, and now I can just in the endpoint selector figure out how I want to target this. Is there a specific endpoint? Is there a group of endpoints? All endpoints? Maybe just Windows endpoints, right? There are multiple sort of node selector mechanisms, and that's all in the online help, right? If you just click on the little question mark up on the top menu bar, there'll be a topic on the selection of the query. It's very extensible, and again, it's the sort of thing that is well suited for sort of automation and plugging this stuff in, which I'll have more to say about in just a minute. You can then see the results here on the individual endpoints, and then we go from there, which is great, right? This is interactive, right? This is the sort of thing that you could do sort of ad hoc on demand in response to an incident, in response to a sort of proactive threat hunting event based on a news report or an ISAC advisory or what have you, a Talos team blog post. But there are also cases where you want to have stuff that is not just point in time, that freezes things at a certain point. And that's what the forensic snapshot piece is all about. So this is built into the Secure Endpoint console, and it's an ability to sort of take endpoints or groups of endpoints and say, I want to take a snapshot. What a snapshot is it is a pre-built set of orbital queries. And again, I'll pop the hood off, the lid off the hood, and take a look at the engine. But it is a pre-built set of queries whose job it is to capture context about the running system in this sort of marked container here, so that if there's an incident, I can take a snapshot. I can do this as an automated action, or with the sort of button click on demand there. And the beautiful thing about that is there are a lot of things where people think they might need a full memory dump to do, right? Well, things like, well, okay, we need to analyze what sockets were open on the endpoint at the time of the attack. So we need a full memory capture and forensics tools to do that, right? No, you need an orbital snapshot because one of the things that's going to capture is all open sockets, listening state, that sort of thing, loaded DLLs. A lot of the scenarios where people think they need to dive into a couple of gigs of raw memory capture are actually covered with this very compact, nicely labeled and organized tool here called the Snapshot here. And it shows up in the device trajectory. You see those two little camera icons that are highlighted in that screen grab of the snapshot of the trajectory. Those are two snapshots there. And then when you pull it up and look at it, you can even export it to CSV, so you can feed it into another forensics tool that you're using, or capture it offline if you have sort of data custody requirements in your organization and things like that. So it's a great way of sort of taking context. You can also do this sort of as a routine baselining thing, right? Say, I want to have when a new endpoint becomes active, I want to take a snapshot of it. And then later, I'll have something that I can compare if I want to know what has changed in that environment since. Where do the snapshots come from? Well, they come from the catalog, of course. And you can see under the category live acquisition of volatile data, which is a thing in the NIST incident response framework, you see we've got various sort of versions of the forensic snapshot for all of our OSs here. And in this case, I'm just looking at the Mac and the Windows evolution. So I must have taken this screenshot before we added the Linux capability here. But you've got the snapshots here. And then again, if you drill in on them, we'll show you all the SQL that's producing this, right? So we look at etc hosts, we look at the state of the processes, we look at the active interfaces, and so on down the list. And you can see all the stuff that is then being captured in this snapshot for you in a way that you can then use it later. Next step. Remember we mentioned there are actually two major things that got enabled with the Advantage tier. There's Orbital, which is really cool all by itself. And then there's Secure Malware Analytics, which is really cool all by itself. And let me show you what happens when you combine the two. Right? I mean, the idea behind the malware analytics piece is you take samples, you take unknown samples, you run them in a controlled environment, and they produce all these indicators as they run. You can see, what did it do? What network connections happened? What processes were involved? What artifacts got dropped on disk? What registry keys got twiddled? All of that sort of thing becomes an indicator in malware analytics. Now, if that sounds like something that could turn into an Orbital query, you're absolutely right. And again, we do the hard work for you. If you look at this particular indicator, which is a particular registry key modification from a malware analytics run, notice that little button that says Orbital query. You click that button, and it automatically produces the SQL that you need to find this thing in your environment, right? So you take a sample, you send it to Secure Malware Analytics. It says, hey, this did this thing that is associated with this activity. And you say, oh, that's interesting. I want to know if that artifact exists anywhere else in my organization. Click the button, grab the query, run it on all your endpoints. this is a beautiful thing. So it's why those two things are sort of linked together so nicely at the Advantage license tier. So it truly is an advantage, right? It's not just a marketing name. This is really cool stuff. The last thing I'm going to do before I then sort of try to wrap this up is just mention that our SecureX orchestration, I did a webinar on this for our endpoint customers a couple months ago. The sort of orchestration piece, there are also cool things that you can do with the Orbital piece, because of course Orbital queries are something that you can do in an orchestration workflow. And that then means that there are also things that you could get off of that little context menu, right? Like things like do a forensic snapshot or run a specific query for something is something that becomes automatable with the SecureX orchestrator, which all Cisco customers have access to at no extra cost. And the way this sort of works in practice, let me just show you how this stuff works with our Talos team, right? So log4j comes out, everybody freaks out. I've got to figure out where this is in my environment. Very quickly, we develop a query for this. We push it out to the catalog. So there I go. I go to my Orbital query catalog and look for log4j, and sure enough, for both Linux and Windows, we've got monitoring tools for how do I determine if this vulnerability exists, and then also look for artifacts of possible exploitation. Again, the full SQL's there, the explanation is there, single click, add to new query, and you can run this in your targets of interest in your environment here. Let's see, is this slide going to advance here or not on me? Mike, can you just advance for me, please?
Sure.
One more, because this is just the Linux version of the same thing. All right, so to wrap this up, this gives you a lot of sort of skill and expertise in a box, right? This is like having a threat hunter's tools prepackaged with a just click here button. So the amount of power that you get versus the amount of hassle that it takes you to get this all set up and to make use of it is a very favorable ratio here. And then if you can go one more for me, please. Yep, there we go. I'm just going to put in a cheap little plug for my own stuff here because there's something that my team and I maintain on the Cisco communities that we call the Orbital Query Corner. This is an occasional series of articles that we write here. If you just go to the Cisco communities, to the security area, and you search for Orbital Query Corner, you'll find this stuff here. And we just sort of take things like log4j, like advisories, or when cool new capabilities like when they added the ability to do queries on both AWS and Azure cloud instances with separate things that pertain to just the cloud environments. I wrote up a little Query Corner article on how you can figure out, do an orbital query on your cloud VMs to figure out what region they're in, and cool things like that. So just something to take a look at, and that's where you can get some tips and tricks on how to use this stuff. And then, that's my piece. And I don't know if there are any questions that we can cover here, but as you can tell, I think this is fun. This is cool. The capabilities that we put in customers' hands are fantastic here. How can we help you use this better?
Yeah, Brian, I really appreciate it. I think the biggest thing is in the automation and having those queries and not having to rely on it as you're building your own custom ones. It dynamically updating. The log4j is a primary example that was industry-wide, regardless of location. Having that Talos integration, that catalog at your fingertips very quickly to run against your endpoints with little to no impact to your users and devices is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I'll open it up to anyone who has any questions that they'd like to vocalize now. But we did have a few questions come through. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free. Otherwise, I can read the ones that came through. Okay, so I got, what licensing level do I receive with the Cisco Orbital?
So if you're at a legacy license, or if you do not see the Orbital options in your current dashboard, very quick, very easy, contact marketing at aspiretransforms.com. I'd be more than happy, Brian and myself, could get on a quick WebEx with you guys, make sure, look at the current version, but the Advantage license will enable both of the options that we've reviewed here today.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another one that came through. What are some recent threats I could scan my endpoints with for now?
So Log4j is a prime example. You know, if you haven't done any security remediation of that, I would recommend that, but anything new in the catalog. So if, like for example, that Brian was going through earlier, so Log4j, but just do the research in the catalog specific to your organization. The SolarWinds one is a little bit older, but still very much relevant. Another prime example of what you can query with your Orbital.
And let me just jump in there too. Orbital, you can actually apply. Remember the one slide that Mike had up about the protect and harden, detect, and respond. And you can actually use this as an adjunct in all of those phases, right? And the sort of hardening, you can do sort of baselining and configuration validation with Orbital queries. The detection, you can find indications of compromise in your environment, and then you can also use it as part of the response as you sort of wrap it up, investigate, look for next steps.
Great, and then we have two more questions. I know we have a few minutes left. Where can I find the online tutorial options for Orbital?
So there's multiple options. Number one, inside the Secure Endpoint dashboard in the top right-hand corner, there is documentation that will link you directly to some Orbital documentation. There is also documentation and a plug at Brian's blog for that, you know, Orbital corner. That'd be a great place to also look. As more queries and Orbital gets more advanced over time, just like the introduction of the Linux, like Brian said, that documentation is going to continue to grow. Brian, you have any other tips or thoughts on knowledge of Orbital?
Sure thing. You can also get at it just from the Secure Endpoint console, right, under Analysis. Orbital is one of the things in that menu. So that'll jump you right into the console there.
Great, and I think we have time for one more question that came through. Any advice for someone just getting started with Cisco Orbital?
So the first thing is obviously do a baseline scan of your instance. Check for vulnerabilities that are known in the wild now. Obviously, look at the documentation, understand, and more importantly, contact Aspire and ourselves if you have questions or if you're concerned about findings that you see in your organization.
Great, and that wraps up on the questions that came through so far on my end. If there's any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly, or we have a minute to spare if anyone wants to speak up.
All right, guys, thank you. Brian, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining me here today. Kathleen, Marketing, Aspire, and everyone that's attended, I hope you have a nice afternoon.
Thank you so much, everyone.